Conservatives, when they lose, will implode. We know they'll implode. They will be scrabbling around, and therefore they need strong, determined leadership, which is provided by us.
So he has to send people out to deny that he's going to stand down in the middle of the election campaign. It is so bonkers.
People who say, well, I couldn't possibly tolerate a Farageist takeover of the Conservative Party may end up accommodating it because they can't see any alternative future for themselves in politics.
I suppose we ought to talk about whether it is an immigration election.
Let's train our own people.
Exactly. Oh, God, I'm agreeing with you.
We're on the same side here.
Yes.
Hello and welcome to the Political Fourcast. Rishi Sunak has just unveiled his manifesto and is going big on a promise of tax cuts, billions in national insurance cuts and promises over immigration, with a hint about leaving the European Convention on Human Rights if it stands in the way of deporting asylum seekers to Rwanda. But after his D-Day disaster and Nigel Farage back in the game, is it enough to shift the dial or even enough to stop the right wing of his own party turning on him before polling day? With Reform creeping up in the polls, their campaign is about overtaking the Tories to become the opposition. Is it really possible? And what would happen then? A Reform Tory takeover? With me, two regulars on the forecast, Conservative peer Jo Johnson, who helped write the winning Tory manifesto in 2015, Harriet Harman, former Labour leader and deputy leader, and Reform UK's current deputy leader, David Bull. Jo, has Rishi Sunak done nearly enough to stop Nigel Farage and David Bull taking over the Tories?
Well, this was the last shot at stopping that phenomenon, the last set-piece event that the government had to really set out its stall to show that it was still fizzing with ideas for a further term after 14 years in office. And there were some ideas in there. Obviously some of them have been controversial, some of them have been a bit corny. But today we saw the Conservatives playing their traditional tunes around we are the party of low taxation, tax, tax, tax. That was the main theme I thought that came through today. It was all about the economy and how at its heart the Conservatives are a tax-cutting party.
Big picture, David, I mean, does this worry you as a strategy? You know, it's reaching out to core votes and self-employed. It's white van man, somebody said at the press conference.
For sure.
That they're going to cut national insurance.
No, it's far too little. It's too late. It was held at Silverstone on a track, and they're going round and round in circles, quite literally. There is nothing there to enthuse anyone in this country. And this is what everyone keeps saying on the doorstep, which is actually it's the same tired rhetoric. You know, it's all very well saying we're lowering tax. We have the highest tax burden in 70 years. High tax, high regulation, low growth. People are sitting there thinking Westminster is so disconnected from the rest of the country. Where's the vision? Where's the drive? Where's the optimism? That's what actually people want to vote for. They want this country to be great again. And quite frankly, it's failing in pretty much every metric.
But there's been a bit of a poll jump since Nigel Farage announced last week.
A big one.
But, well, not that big. I mean, do you really think all this talk of we're going to be second is remotely credible?
What we are seeing, when I stayed around with Richard Tice, we were at 2%, right? And now we're polling at about 17%. That's an extraordinary change. Now, the question is, does that translate into votes? It is very difficult for us to do that and to get members of parliament. But there are target Cs where we appear to be doing incredibly well. When Nigel goes to certain places, people are hanging off bridges. There are signs saying, thank goodness you've come back. And I think that shows how magnanimous Richard Tice has been, actually.
But the problem is, I mean, I think there's one poll at about 17, but the rest are sort of around 11, 12%, which is not unlike the Lib Dems. It's just a little bit ahead of the Lib Dems. But where the Lib Dems are very good at now these days is concentrating their votes to win seats. And the trouble you have is that your support is sort of spread quite evenly around sections of the country.
One of the other things that we have to get across is we're not standing down for the Tories. We've done that before. As you know, the Tories got an 80-seat majority as a result of that. We've been really clear we are not standing down. We gave them that majority and they have completely squandered it. So we're not doing it again.
But you want to take them over?
So Nigel's really clear about this. Yes, is the honest answer, because actually we need a true Conservative party. That being said, of course, we're not just taking votes from the Conservatives. We're taking votes from Labour as well, particularly in the Red Wall. And actually the white van man is quite a good analogy because those are the Brexit-supporting constituents. I represented the North West. Those people, I think, are starting to come back to us.
Jo, I mean, What do you think of a Farage takeover? I mean, that's a hell of a big church, one that's got Nigel Farage and you in it.
We need to be clear what we mean by takeover. Do we mean Reform gets more votes or a bigger percentage share of the vote than the Conservatives, and in which case it's overtaking the Conservatives?
No,
or do we actually mean Nigel Farage becoming leader of the Conservative Party? They're two very different things.
That's his ambition, isn't it? His now stated ambition. Really.
Well, I think his ambition is actually for the Conservatives to be overtaken by Reform and Nigel be leader of that. I mean, also, the Conservatives, when they lose, will implode. We know they'll implode. So therefore, they will be scrabbling around, and therefore they need strong, determined leadership, which is provided by us.
Can I just mention something else that's happened, seems to me, and see what Joe thinks about this, is that the sort of drifting along to the right in the Tory party has been happening for a little while, because there was a whole load of MPs, like Joe, sort of more centrist, Ken Clarke, Dominic Grieve, Philip Hammond, Nicky Morgan, a sort of sensible centrist Tories who've all been pushed out, so that what is left for Reform to be trying to take over is already much more comfortable with Reform. And that's why you get people like Suella Braverman saying, come on in. That ballast that was always there that kept the Tories in the centre has been pushed out. And the question is, we've always assumed that you win in this country from the centre left or centre right. And that actually, the more you go to the extreme, the less likely you are to have electoral success. But I don't know whether or not that's what we thought about America. And look what's happening with Trump. So I'm hoping that it is right that we're not going to end up with a sort of, populist, extremist, Trump-like Conservative
but
party.
We are not. So this is the thing. Everyone keeps saying we are far right. We are not a far right party. We are a centre-right party, actually. And that is what the commentators are saying.
World?
Well, in my world. We are. But actually, we are a truly conservative party.
You're
we
sort
believe
of
in a small
disruptors.
state.
You're disruptors. That's the thing.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
We're disruptors, certainly. But also, I think just from the electorate's point of view, they like the fact that we are disruptors, that we're the insurgents, that we are fighting, as Nigel says. This is very much being built from the ground up, and I welcome that.
Joe, what do you make of this?
Well, look, Harriet is, of course, right. The Conservative Party has changed dramatically over the course of the last 14 years. The party that I first became an MP for in 2010 was very different. Sort of running a tight fiscal policy, very socially liberal, keen to stay in touch with the world as it was evolving. The party today is very different, and in many respects it is more sort of, in values terms, akin to where Reform is coming from. So it is deeply, deeply problematic for people who joined the party of David Cameron and George Osborne back in 2010.
Yes, do you think the sort of the come on in Conservatives, the Suella Bravermans, and the we can't, Reform are the enemy Conservatives can stay in the same party?
No, I think that would be deeply difficult to achieve, hugely difficult to achieve. Well, I think the trouble is, if you look at what happened in the US when the Republicans were basically taken over by the Tea Party and then the MAGA Americans, what happens is you see that people become sort of supine and craven, and they think, well, this is the way the world is moving. If I want to stay in politics, if I want to stay on the pitch, I better adjust to the new realities fast. And so inevitably, people who say, well, I couldn't possibly tolerate a Farageist, Ticist takeover of the Conservative Party may end up accommodating it because they can't see any alternative future for themselves in politics. And I think that would obviously be a shame, but that may be the way it ends up going.
How do you feel about that, though, in your gut?
Well,
how does it make you feel?
No, look, I think there is an alternative path where you have people who are capable of articulating a different vision for sort of a mainstream conservatism in the UK that is capable of projecting an alternative world. But I don't think we're quite there at the moment.
But it's incredible, isn't it, that we've had, in the middle of an election campaign, seriously discussed the question, is Rishi Sunak going to stay on till the general election? I've seen a lot of things over my decades. I've never seen that. So he has to send people out to deny that he's going to stand down in the middle of the election campaign. It is so bonkers.
And if I
But
may,
it's quite interesting, David, that you're saying we are a centre-right party. And you can see it with the way Nigel Farage does his TV interviews as well. He will try and moderate his message a little bit when he's doing BBC One, and then he'll go full-throated Nigel Farage when he's on GB News.
Yes, of course. But he's playing to the audience.
So which is the real Nigel Farage?
I have to say, I think Nigel is probably the shrewdest political operator I have ever met. And of course, you need to tailor your message. But also, it's not just Nigel in this party. There are people like Richard, people like me, and we're probably the most tempering influences on Nigel. And just going back to the Conservative Party, I think that your point is really valid, because actually you're not one party. You're 5 different parties or thereabouts, aren't you? At least. And that is where the problem is going to arise, because actually at the moment it's held together with New Conservatives, ERG, all of the rest of them. And it's a slightly unhappy or very unhappy marriage, I think.
But if you are sort of a centrist party, wanting to be a centrist party that could replace the Conservative Party, you've had your problems with candidates.
Indeed.
This week. The guy who said we should be neutral about the Nazis,
yes.
and then your spokesman defending it and all of that, and which you then had to. You've had to have a new spokesman's line on yesterday's spokesman's line.
But from our point of view, of course, we had a snap election. We had to choose those candidates. Any party will always have bad apples. Now, all of those are being thoroughly investigated. If they are found to have breached any guidelines or indeed have incited violence or hatred, they'll be out.
But it's sort of odd that you even need to say we're having an investigation.
Is it?
Into...
Other parties have exactly the same thing. Look at the Green Party, for example.
What he said was out there, clearly in black and white.
So I've looked at
on
that.
His social media.
He commented,
it's
didn't
sexist,
he?
It's racist.
He commented, didn't he? Now, it was some years ago, but we do have to give the benefit of the doubt and actually investigate that properly. You can't just fire someone on the evidence, the face value evidence.
But you can say it's wrong, and the party didn't say it was wrong.
I've said it's wrong.
But yesterday, your position was it's not wrong.
So look, yes, in terms of comms, that was a mistake. Yes.
Right. So that's just the sort of professionalisation of a party.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that goes back to the issue.
Which undermines your claim to be able to take over the Conservative Party, is my point.
No, but also you've got to remember we're a small grassroots organisation, so we have grown so rapidly. We don't have the money that the two main parties have. So, I mean, we did a press conference yesterday and the journalists were saying, well, why was I sorting out the lectern and the microphones? Well, that's because it's all hands to the pump.
And so do you think the anti-Muslim stuff will be toned down as well?
Will be what, sorry?
Will be toned down as well.
Well, I think but anyone who incites hatred will be removed from that party. That is not acceptable.
So are you comfortable with all of that, or are you sort of?
I'm comfortable.
You're on the liberal end of the broad church.
I am on the liberal end, as you know. But no, of course, anyone who shows intolerance or hatred cannot be in the party.
I mean, because the other curious thing about sort of where you are in terms of the spectrum is, here you are, a sort of well-known gay man in reform, in a senior position, in a party that's got this alliance with all these people in Northern Ireland who think everything you do is terrible and wrong and immoral. And how do these two things sort of compute?
So for me, it's about priorities, isn't it? So we have said for us, it's the immigration election, it's the economy, it's the health service. I'm a doctor, as you know. So for me, the health service is paramount, restoring our sovereignty, leaving the ECHR, which the Conservatives still don't want to do. Also, we want to see more tax cuts and stuff. Actually, sexuality, I mean, I believe in equality, equality for everyone. And I think across the party, everyone believes that too.
Does reform support gay marriage?
We don't have a party policy on it, but absolutely. I had to think about it. Do we have a policy? But I certainly do.
Yeah.
And actually, I think Nigel. I don't know what his personal views are, but it would obviously be a free vote, wouldn't it?
Well, let's come back to the sort of the campaign as it's going. I mean, Harriet, you've been out there, and you're clearly trying to contain your excitement.
Well, it's
not very well.
But it's very weird because it seems like, we didn't know when the election was going to be called because we're not in control of it. So from HQ, there was absolute edicts the whole time to the candidates. Get the candidates selected. Every candidate's got to have a video ready to go out the minute the election's called. We've got to be ready. So they were like waiting because they didn't control the situation. And it seems like Rishi Sunak caught his own side by surprise. So when all of ours were pressing their buttons, the candidates, for their videos to go out, there was like silence from the other side. And I feared that with the stacks of money that the Conservatives have put in their war chest by raising the spending limit for parties to 37 million from 19 million, I thought they were going to spend all that on very clever social media and that we would see a very invidious campaign suck us down. But actually, they don't seem to be organised on social media either. It's quite weird that they seem to be a very inept campaign. And what is remarkable, bearing in mind that in 2019, Jeremy Corbyn had a load of people with lots of ideological views, but not much organisational experience or inclination. There's been a big turnaround so that we've got a big fighting machine on the ground.
No,
as I say, we've got a lot of people. We're reassuring people that we won't do the ideology such like was done by Liz Truss. I mean, ideology for some people is quite scary if it undermines their standard of living. But I think we have got a lot of people to change their minds, but it's extraordinary how inept the Conservatives have been, really. It's quite surprising.
I mean, just on that, do you think the ideology has been sort of taken out too much? That's what a lot of people sort of say,
No,
there's still a lot of, I don't really know what Labour's about anymore and, what they really believe in. The ideology's gone, as you say.
No, I think it's very, very basic. Rachel believes, and obviously she's been perfectly qualified to be Chancellor of the Exchequer since she was about 14. She believes that there should be economic stability. Wes Streeting believes that there should be a strong health service, but it should be reformed. I mean, they are very sort of, I want to say bog standard Labour, but that sounds a bit rude. They are very solid Labour, and
but they're not ideology, they're practical, those sorts of things, aren't they? They're sort of, we'll run the country well.
Their ideology is to worry about people who've worked hard and now have got to get a second job because even working hard in one job is not good enough, and then have to wait on a waiting list, and whose child with special educational needs can't get a place. It's that is ideology, if you like. It's not intellectual, airy-fairy. It's very basic.
Up and down for joy when Nigel Farage announced? Did you all think that's going to be great for us?
I thought it was a bombshell. When I heard it, I thought this is going to absolutely hex the Conservatives. It's going to completely derail their campaign, which wasn't visible at that point anyway, and it's going to make trouble for them. But I don't like to see the economy wrecked. I don't like to see public services not cared for, and I don't like to see society divided. So to the extent that some of David's colleagues, not David, of course, David's colleagues are going to be divisive, that is a problem for all of us. And then if we get in, that is just yet another thing that we're going to have to deal with. Social division stoked up by a divisive election.
Joe, what do you make of what Harriet's saying about the Conservative campaign? You were central to the winning campaign in 2015,
Well, the difference in 2015 was we then had the Fixed Term Parliament Act. And we knew precisely when the election was going to be held. It was going to be on May the 7th, 2015, and we knew that for 4 years. So we had plenty of time to prepare everything, the campaign, the manifesto, everything was bomb-proofed to the 9th degree. Very different when you're calling a snap election and doing things on the hoof in conditions of great secrecy.
Yeah.
So you clearly...
But you're supposed to surprise the other side, aren't you? Not your own side.
I'm puzzled by this. Then, actually, if you don't have a fixed-term parliament, you have more control and more power to not take yourself by surprise. That's the baffling thing.
He had to keep the decision to such a small group of people that inevitably it was going to take by surprise the campaign team. Because once you let the campaign team know, you've effectively let the entirety of the media world know.
Can I tell you what happened just after the election was called? Is that obviously I was retiring, so I was like packing up my office, and I was wanting to say goodbye to all my colleagues. There was no Labour MPs there. They'd all gone and not gone to their own constituencies, gone to their twin target marginals. But the place was heaving with Tory MPs all hugging each other and saying goodbye. It was like a funeral. It was the weirdest thing.
And also...
it's like, what's he done to us? Hug each other.
But one of the things that interests me, though, is reform in its sort of corporate structure, because it's not a conventional political party like the Conservatives or the Labour. It's not, as I understand, a charity. It's a business.
Well,
more importantly than it just being a business, it doesn't have any internal party democracy. So there are none of the sort of checks and balances on the leadership, which Keir Starmer is subject to and which Rishi Sunak is patently subject to. And I think that's quite important in our political system, that decisions are sort of broad-based and accountable within a party, and that doesn't seem to be there for reform.
So you've got to remember how it was set up. It was set up very quickly, of course, in Brexit, and that structure has remained. And of course, we're in the process of changing that and the memorandum and actually making it more of a democracy in the party. And of course, we were halfway through that when the election was called. So I take the point, absolutely.
So how were you made deputy leader?
Well, that's a very good point. Richard Tice asked me.
He just appointed you?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so Nigel Farage can just get rid of you if he wants. And that's it, yes.
Yeah.
Or appoint anybody he wants.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is a very strange setup, isn't it?
But everything we do is different, and I quite like that. The fact is, we don't follow the same tried and tested recipe, and actually that
democracy.
I think... No, not democracy. But as I keep saying, so obviously we've got many supporters around the country, and what we're trying to do is to give them more of a say in the way the party is run. So the party is evolving as we speak. We're only
but they have no say. That's the point, isn't it? Nobody in Reform, except Nigel Farage, who's the majority shareholder, has any say.
It doesn't really work like that, but on paper, on paper, the structure is such that Nigel has a good say.
And what happens to any profits made by this business?
There are no profits from the business. There are none.
So it's a loss-making business.
Yes.
Okay. And how does it fund its losses?
So obviously we fundraise money. You'll have to ask Richard Tice the intricacies of this, but obviously Richard has kept the party afloat. And only now are we starting to see donations coming in to the party.
So he's put his own money in?
Yes.
Why?
Because he passionately believes we need a better country. And that is not being offered by the two main parties. And that's what we intend to do.
So are you paid to be deputy leader?
No.
No. So you're a volunteer?
I am a volunteer for my sins. Yeah, but also I believe really.
And do you put your own money into the party?
No, I haven't. No. But I've put a lot of time over the last 3 years into this, and actually been by Richard's side.
I suppose we ought to talk about whether it is an immigration election. I mean, there are two things. You know, you've got Reform on one hand saying it's an immigration election. You've got the Tories saying this is a tax-cutting election. And the truth is,
a cost of living and public services election. I mean, that's what people are saying to me on the doorstep on the ground when I knock on the door.
They're all linked to immigration. 2.5 million people here in the last 2 years. So 745,000 people net the year before last, then 685,000, so it's come down a bit. But for me, if you're bringing in all of these people, you can't then have the schools and education and all the rest of it. Social services, the cost of living goes up. We're addicted to cheap labour. We're importing that cheap labour. You've got 9 million people economically inactive in this country. Why?
Well, there's a lot of people who, I mean, I was just thinking of a woman I met recently who wants to be a midwife and in fact can't train to be a midwife. She's got her own kids because she couldn't afford to pay for the childcare while she was training. Sure. And there's no bursaries, so she's working nights at Morrison's. And then what do? We have to import midwives from abroad. We should be jolly grateful to them and be thanking them. But actually, what a shame that somebody who's so passionate about that can't train here. And also, a lot of people know that when they end up in a hospital bed, they're very grateful for there's more immigrants looking after people in hospital than there are lying in those hospital beds. That's the truth of it.
The British Medical Association stopped the number of training places for doctors.
Exactly.
The Conservatives have increased those.
Part of the problem is that we are not training people for the jobs that they want to do in this country, and therefore we have to import. And whether it's tech or whether it's caring services.
Let's train our own people.
Exactly. Oh, God, I'm agreeing with you.
We're on the same side here. Yes. And also, so let's look at nurses.
But within that, before you just move on.
But that's not immigration.
You can't blame the problems with the health service on immigrants, can you? Which you do try to do. You know, you can say that there is pressure on public services in general, but most immigrants come here are young, they're healthy, they don't clog up hospital beds, they actually work in the NHS and they pay tax.
But one of the biggest problems is they have been bringing family members in who do rely on more healthcare, but actually...
But who are also young on the whole.
But the fundamental issue with the health service is actually it needs desperate reform. I think we all agree on that. But also, just in terms of the number of beds, we had 300,000 beds. We're now down to 140,000 beds. We don't have capacity. No one has the big vision. It goes back. What is the big vision for this country?
I mean, it's interesting. Joe's sort of stuck in the middle between likely government and wannabe opposition. And that's sort of the problem that the Conservative Party's got in the bigger picture, hasn't it? In that it's trying to sound tough on immigration, when the truth is Rishi Sunak allowed all these people in because he knew that we needed them for economic growth. They talk about immigration as if it's sort of some unstoppable force. I mean, it's just people who come in following the rules that the government...
And students as well. I mean, Joe did a lot in higher education. Students, I mean, foreign students is really important for our soft power as well as for our economy. So, Joe,
UKIP, your predecessor party, used to have a very sensible policy on international students, which was it welcomed them and it wanted them out of the net migration figures and didn't want us to include them in any targets or caps on immigration. And I thought UKIP at one point had one of the best policies on international students. I hope reform, when your manifesto comes out next week, your contract comes out. I hope you will say similarly sensible things.
Look, just in terms of immigration, of course, immigration is the lifeblood of this country, but it has to be managed, and it hasn't been managed under the Conservatives. And it's legal immigration that's been the real problem, actually. We are focusing on illegal, and we're at 11,000 people this year so far.
But isn't the point that it has literally been managed, in that these people were deliberately let in because people argued it's a good thing to let in foreign students.
Because our own workforce hadn't
and because
been
our workforce
properly.
needed
Our NHS
immigrants.
needs them as well.
So it has been managed.
So if we didn't have any immigration at all, we'd have a shrinking population. And we've got birth rates of around 1.5 at the moment per
net
woman.
migration is 685,000.
It is at the moment,
yeah.
Well, relative to what?
Well, it came down from 745,000.
So what number do you want it to be? You want net migration as zero.
Yeah.
And how do you reconcile that with the declining birth rate?
Because what we have to do is actually to catch up in terms of public services, and then you can then decide what your rate should be at that point.
So how long do you want to have a net migration of zero for?
5.
With the declining birth rate of 1.5 and falling.
Well,
the economy and public services would grind to a halt.
What are you saying?
Well, I'm saying the impact of that would be exacerbation of extreme skills shortages in our economy. We've already got the business community crying out for skilled workers in many different sectors. And we've got the NHS already struggling to fill vacancies.
But
so we'd see public services
own?
people care most about. We'd see our businesses crippled. So I think if we went to net migration of zero for 5 years, I think you'd see extreme wage inflation. Inflation.
That includes students, by the way.
No, it doesn't. And we also have exempted health and social care staff.
Oh, right. So it's not so net.
It's not, because at the moment we can't fill those skills gaps.
So it's not net zero. It's actually
excluding
some of the biggest populations of immigrants.
It's excluding health and social care until we've trained people in this country. And one of the biggest problems I have was Project 2000, where we said that all nurses had to have a degree. What an absolute load of nonsense that is. And you'll talk to nurses around the country who say that was basically the death knell of nursing. Because actually what you want is people who are great at holding hands. You want academic nurses. You also want great carers.
Joe, what do you make of where the Conservatives are on immigration and putting it centre stage? The Conservative campaign has not switched tack at all, has it? It's stayed on tax. It's stayed on the £2,000, even though it's very controversial and been debunked. And it's stayed on immigration.
Yeah, I think, they've taken some strong steps on immigration that will have a big impact on the net migration numbers as they come out over the course of the next year. The moves on dependents, on students not being able to bring dependents, is going to have a huge impact on the competitiveness of our HE offer. Raising the skilled worker salary threshold to £38,000 from £28,000. That's going to have a big impact on numbers of people coming into the skilled worker route. So frankly, I think they've done a lot, to be honest, and I don't think they should do any more on that. I think they should just call it quits on immigration, having taken those steps, and focus the rest of the campaign on the economy, which is where they've got a decent record.
And do you think he's right to double down on the £2,000 claim about Labour?
Well, that's following a tried and trusted.
I think their manifesto is going to be unpicked, and the bill for them is probably going to be higher than £2,000. So I think they've got to be careful what they wish for.
I get the sense, Joe, that I see why you left elected politics now, because you're a very reluctant politician, aren't you? You don't really like these sort of dirty political tactics.
Well, no. I mean, my position on Europe was not really compatible with seeking re-election as a Conservative MP, because I disagreed with our decision to leave the single market, leave the customs union, leave the European Union full stop. And you couldn't really successfully continue as an elected member of the Conservative Party with that set of views. So that was why.
Would you be happy being out there on the doorstep saying, yes, Labour's going to put your taxes up by £2,000?
You ought to be joining the Labour Party.
Let him finish. Look,
I mean, I do think tax is important, and I think the Conservatives having an identity as a party that instinctively wants to lower taxes is part of the sort of the core DNA. And I think, to that extent, this element of the Conservative programme is one I'm very comfortable with.
We always like to end with a longer range forecast. So just in 1 minute each, how do you think things are going to play out over the next few weeks, David?
Every day is a learning experience. It's a roller coaster of delight. I don't know. We are picking up in the poll ratings. I think the last polls were before Nigel, or they sort of took into account some of the days that Nigel was there, but not all of them. We think we will overtake the Conservatives in the next few days. I think that adds enormous sort of rocket fuel behind our campaign. We're out and about around the country. We have a punishing schedule. I'm on some of that. It's great, and actually meeting people and understanding what people are saying around the country seems to be very different to what people are saying in London. So I'm optimistic. And what does success look like for us? Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elected MPs would be great.
Joe?
Well, look, D-Day wasn't great, but barring a repeat of another gaffe like that, I don't think Reform will overtake the Conservatives in the polls, nor do I think that they will win a large number of MPs, or even 4, 5 or 6. I think actually the next couple of weeks will be quite flat and not much movement in any particular direction. And I think we'll just go into election day pretty much as we are now.
And Harriet, I mean, from your experience out there in, target seat number 157, how do you think things are looking?
Well, I think there's still a lot of people who haven't made up their mind, and that's what our, canvassers and what I find on the doorstep. I think there's a lot of people who are pretty nearly finished with the Conservatives, and also in Scotland, pretty nearly finished with the SNP. But actually, there is a lot of people who haven't made up their mind, and a week is a long time in politics. So it's quite
Those
depressing.
are all the things you've been told to come here and say, and you don't believe any of it.
You're never allowed to be cheerful, so you can't be complacent before an election. And after an election, you certainly can't be exuberant and triumphant, because the public hate arrogance. So you've got to be really repressing yourself the whole time, which I find quite hard.
Thank you all very much indeed. Harriet Harman, Joe Johnson, David Bull. That was this week's Political Forecast. Bye-bye.